Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this evening. You're listening to Tex Messages the Resurrection. I'm the parasite of the show, Rick Tex. We got a huge show scheduled for tonight, so I'm pretty pumped up for it, ladies and gentlemen. So, lately we've been testing out sound quality, video on video. So we're going to test out a little bit of audio and video for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Now we want to talk about a pretty serious topic. So I want to make sure I get it right and that we're hitting on all 8 cylinders. So you may have heard of food intolerance testing before. Now there's a lot of tests out there, the ELISA, ALCAT, MRT, Cyrix, LEAP, all that junk. What we're going to cover today is the ALCAT, which stands for Antigen Leukocyte Antibody Testing. Now leukocytes are also known as white blood cells. So what it does is it measures how your white blood cells respond when exposed to different types of food. Now, if you go to their website, or if you go to the website that sells Science Systems or something like that, that officially administers the ALCAT, they'll show you all kinds of different tests to administer, and then you can have, say, one test might cover 180 foods, one might cover 2,000. So it gives you a pretty big list of options to choose from. And how the test works is it determines if you have a mild, severe, or no intolerance to certain foods. And it gives you some color-coded chart. So, if you want to just know the conclusion right now, without knowing any detail, Tex Messages, the Resurrection, cannot equivocally say whether the test is valid or not. In fact, we had pretty erratic results. And in fact, there have been double-blind studies that have showed inconsistent results as well. So, if you really want to believe that the ALCAT test is great, then stick around and hear what we have to say about it. Maybe you can refute us, or maybe not. So, one of the things that it does is the immune biological reaction of the white blood cells make up about 1% of the total volume in a healthy human. Red blood cells are around 40 to 50%, then you have the platelets, and then you have the plasma. We get a picture. Yeah, so we got a picture of the basically human blood right here, right behind us on this green screen, ladies and gentlemen. So the white blood cells have nuclei, unlike the red blood cells and the platelets and the plasma. That basically means that they have some degree of intelligence. They can identify, what their whole objective is to identify pathogens, viruses, and to attack them and get rid of them in your system. So there's different types of white blood cells though. There's the neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil, lymphocyte, and monocyte. You probably heard of lymphocytes before as far as lymphatic cancer and all that. So, white blood cells are initially created in your bone marrow. Now, you probably also heard of bone marrow cancer before. So, one of the healthy things you can eat too is bone broth. So you get some chicken or beef bones and 48 hours inside apple cider vinegar on a crock pot slow cooker. And then you have some nice, healthy, delicious bone broth. So, now the 5 different types of white blood cells. We can get, so we got the 5 different, if you're looking at a scanning electron microscope, this is what the white blood cells will look like. Well, I mean, something like that. I mean, maybe not exactly an identical replica match of it, but for the most part, that's what they will be. So, the 5 different types, neutrophil. So you may have heard of seen pus before. It's sort of like a white liquidy. It looks kind of like mayonnaise. That's the neutrophil of the white blood cells. Now they're called cagers and killers. They'll cage. Generally they go after pathogens, which are specific causative agents that are bad for your body. And they'll defend against bacteria and fungi. They're the first responders essentially. The early stages of acute inflammation. They usually die after phagocytosing. What phagocytosing means is if you see like Pac-Man, for example. Pac-Man phagocytoses all those little blue dots. So that's what it basically means. So they have their lifespan is about 5.4 days or something like 120 to 130 hours. And they're basically the first responders. So when you first have a problem, they initiate the assault. And then the next type of white blood cells is eosinophil, which is about 2 to 4% of the white blood cell total. They're actually rare in blood, but they're more so prevalent in the mucous membranes. of your respiratory, digestive, lower urinary tracts, and they rise in response to allergies, parasites, collagens, and they are located and operate in the spleen and the central nervous system. What they do is they secrete chemicals that destroy large parasites, too big for any of the other white blood cells to phagocytosize. So when the neutral, now we're going to get to the communicator ones. The lymphocytes are generally the communicative ones. They're the ones who determine who needs to go where and when and what they need to do. So that's why there's different variations of these white blood cells. See what happens, ladies and gentlemen. Scientists will look at these things underneath the scanning electron microscope, and they'll just observe what the white blood cells do, all their different shapes and sizes, and then they'll evaluate them and study them over a very long period of time, and then this is what they come up with, the 5 different types. So that's why we're reading them, and that's why we think they're important. So the next type is the basophil. They're allergic and antigen response by releasing histamine, causing blood vessel dilation. And they're only about 0.5% of your white blood cells. So what the histamine does is it widens your blood vessels to the tissue to increase flow to the injured portion. And then there's another chemical that it releases called heparin, which is an anticoagulant that inhibits clotting. So it also releases signals to attract eosinophils, the eosinophils, and the neutrophils. So the basophils also communicate, they all communicate with each other. That's why they have the nuclei. The nuclei is part of the communication. It's like a brain inside of them. So these cells inside your body all have their individual neurological systems, which is why it's important to be healthy, because the complexity of the human body is extremely high, and it's something that we'll never understand. So the other lymphocytes, they're a clear coagulant fluid that passes from intercellular spaces of body tissue into lymphatic vessels. Now there's 3 different variations of the lymphatic cells. They have the B cells, which are the antibodies that attack pathogens. You have the T cells. See, they coordinate the immune response against virus and tumor cells, and they make the cytokines. The cytokines are, it's signaling cells, more or less. That's what cytokine means. And then they also have the natural killer cells, which kill the viruses and the cancers. So when you have an autoimmune disease, what's happening is your body is basically attacking its own cells. It's a civil war within your body. I mean, that could be due to a number of things. Poor communication with these cytokines. Possibly some of your cells are mutated so they're not recognizable by the other ones. There's definitely a lot of factors. So the fifth type of white blood cells is the monocyte. They're the biggest ones of the bunch. They clean up and they phagocytose the dead or the enemy cell microorganism. So when you have dead cells or tissues around your spleen or your heart or anything like that, hopefully not your heart, but around the liver, kidneys, that area, the monocytes are the ones that come in and really clean it up. They're considered the cleaner or the vacuums of that. So I mean, each one of these white blood cells, underneath the microscope, yeah, they look different, and they generally, the ones who have a certain appearance happen to do the same function. So it's very, but they have a very complex system of communication, which is something that we haven't yet delved into, as far as what language they speak to, or how they speak, or if they speak in Morse code or smoke signals, or what the deal is. But the fact of the matter is, they all have their different purposes and functionality. And the ALCAT test is ultimately testing what these white blood cells do when you expose it to different types of food. Now, the test could be a bit fallacious, because if you isolate what happens is you go to a lab testing facility, they'll draw your blood and they'll send it to a lab. The lab does the ALCAT testing. So your blood is completely isolated from the rest of your body. So just due to the complex communication that a lot of these white blood cells do, it's very, very difficult to determine if there's any validity or reliability to that test, because it's no longer part of your body anymore. It's just your blood. I mean, it's part of your blood, yes, but your blood, it's isolated from your body. So what is it communicating with? Which makes it very difficult for me to buy into the ALCAT. And in fact, I actually did the ALCAT test once, and I had a pretty good idea of foods that didn't really jive with my digestive system, and the results were fairly inconsistent with what I expected them to be. Oh yeah, that could mean that I just have a poor screening and testing method, but I'd like to think after 20 plus years that I got a pretty good system down to identify foods that don't really work out so well with my intestinal system. However, the ALCAT basically provided no assistance or clarification or conclusion to things that I suspected. So I mean, ultimately, yeah, it's kind of a waste of a couple $100. So I mean, to think that you can just go and take a test somewhere and find some results that'll definitively change your life and make it great again, yeah, it sounds good on paper, but in reality, it hasn't really worked out. So some of the disorders of low white blood cells or acceptable blood cells, they can happen. Well, I mean, yeah, the disorders are either you have low or you have too many of them, or they don't do what they're supposed to do. I mean, there's different names for them, but that's not important now. So some of the things that can cause those disorders are medications. Chemotherapy is one of them, but antibiotics, phenothiazines, benzodiazepines, antithyroid, anticonvulsants, quinine, quinidine, indomethacin, procainamide, and thiazides. And other things that can cause them are radiation, toxins, alcohol, benzenes, starvation, and hyposplenism, which basically means your spleen gets out of control and just does whatever it wants to do. So the fact is, we will probably tackle the red blood cells, plasma, platelets some other time, but that's basically white blood cells in a nutshell. Now you can easily just look them up in a search and get some further clarification, but the fact of the matter is, they're very important. They require communication, they require a good source of hydration and water, and that you don't electrocute yourself, because then how would they communicate? So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to put a wrap on this show. We're certainly glad that you joined us once again. Hopefully we've been able to illuminate you as to what white blood cells exactly do. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good night.